The elite panic that we're seeing, which is really unprecedented, right? I mean, you got billionaires melting down and, people on CNBC having a nervous breakdown, right?
My sources, yours, are all freaking out.
This is a big problem, and there is a lot of panic.
I think there's definitely a bit of a panic.
There's going to be genuine fear among many establishment Democrats.
Democrats better wake the fuck up.
If you've seen what Batman is up against in Gotham.
On a scale of 1 to 10, Jessica, how scared are you to win?
You're killing your party.
Could they tame the lion now at this point?
But how about the rich? No. Well, no. Shot? Not yet.
An executive told one of my next guests that Wall Street is clearly less concerned with the war in the Middle East. Quote, more people are focused on the New York mayor's race.
This is a joyfully wrapped, total anti-Semite.
You are killing your party.
Honestly, I didn't sleep because I had to talk a lot of people off ledges.
You're better than this.
They're taking Wall Streeters and make them walk out onto the ice in the East River and then they fall through.
Yeah. They used all of their weapons of political destruction against Zohran Mamdani, the ones that have worked for 50 years in buying elections, and they still lost. The panic is maybe we can no longer control every political outcome in high-profile races. That's what the panic is really about. Now, to your point about the abundance guys, the Pod Save America guys, the sort of Obama-era blob of media, political operatives, pundits at the center of the Democratic Party. Their attempt to appropriate Mamdani's victory essentially as their own, or at least get some of the reflected glory of the election night victory, to my mind, first of all, it's absurd, right? Like, let's just be honest about that. This is the center of the Democratic Party that has spent a decade plus berating the left, punching left, creating the Bernie bro epithet, essentially trying to purge the Democratic Party of its populist wing, to try to make sure that no one like Zohran Mamdani ever emerges in the future. So for them to turn around in the last week, last couple hours of the campaign, when the poly market odds shifted and it was like, oh, he actually might win, for them to suddenly turn around and be like, oh, he's our guy, right? Like, he's great. And look, he's supposedly touting our agenda. And look, maybe he's not even winning because of his agenda. He's only winning because he's cool and he's telegenic and he had good videos. That's an attempt, in my view, to depoliticize his victory, say that it's not actually about the policies. All of that, to my mind, is an attempt to stay relevant and to continue in their way to predetermine policy outcomes, right? So you have the oligarchy that spent big against Mamdani that now is freaking out that it has lost its power or some of its power to buy electoral outcomes. You have the center of the Democratic Party worried that it can no longer control political or policy outcomes. So after the primary, that Democratic blob, to my mind, is trying to insinuate itself into Mamdani's orbit, or at least the orbit of that political movement, to try to keep its influence and its relevance. And where that is I think, significant, is that what will ultimately happen is an attempt to try to get him to back off some of his policies. That there's a bargain that happens here, right? Which is that part of the Democratic Party, again, I'm using Pod Save America as a proxy here, but MSNBC, Pod Save America, the abundance guys, the sort of pundit political operative blob. There's a transaction that typically happens there. We give you celebrity, fame, rising star status, as long as you don't push too hard, push too aggressively, push too impolitely the policies that we and our backers don't like. That's essentially the implied transaction. And so I think that's why you see that sort of crew trying to remain relevant first of all, it's sort of a business model. Their business model is to remain the gatekeepers and arbiters of the Democratic Party discourse, but it's also to remain influential on the policy. And I think the question will be whether Mamdani himself and its movement negotiates with that or doesn't. Now, I want to add one more thing here, because I've seen some of the pushback to what I've just said, because I put some of this on social media, and it's like, oh, why can't you guys take the W? Why are you so mean? Why are you sore winners? Go ahead.
Let me read some of that, actually. I want people to really know what happened. So you tweeted out this tweet that got close to like 30,000 likes. You said, thoughts and prayers for the Pod Save guys, the Abundance guys, and all the other Dims up late crafting 2 different versions of press releases / podcasts to go out tomorrow night, either claiming Zohran's win as their own or claiming Cuomo's win as proof that they're right to bash the left. Okay, people melted down.
Right.
Anandjir Haddades wrote, David, my friend, just say welcome. Politics is not record collecting. It's good when people find out about your favorite band. Right. Someone noted that Zohran had gone on Pod Save America, and Jon Favreau popped in saying, I genuinely feel sorry for David. Just be happy a candidate you believe in won, instead of firing off half a dozen tweets because you're angry that people you don't like said nice things about him. Yeah. I want to validate you, David, because I listen to Pod Save America pretty regularly, so I know what they actually say or do.
I mean, you must be a masochist. I mean, you had to do that, but okay.
I'm a freak like that, David. What can I say? Yeah. But I have a clip I want you to listen to, because while it is true that they have said some complimentary things about Zohran Mamdani, you kind of have to when the zeitgeist is behind them. They're like the relatively young arbiters of taste in the Democratic Party. The Pod Save guys can't look too uncool. Favreau specifically said this at the end of the episode that I believe came out the day of the election before they knew their results.
Just for the purposes of a thought experiment here, I do think it's worth separating out the style of politics from the policy, right? Because we could have a whole debate about like what issue positions and policy positions can win a general election. Like, do I think a DSA candidate could win a national election or an election in a purple state? Maybe, but I don't think so, right? But if you have, I think that our party, you have to have people running for office in our party who campaign like Mamdani's been campaigning, who run a campaign like that, who are meeting people all over the place, who are speaking to people's concerns, who are, like you said, Levitt, the strength I think people are looking for is fight on behalf of people who need a fighter, right? And to constantly be making about the people that you want to represent. And I don't think we've seen that. If there is a, non-DSA in some purple states or even nationally, center-left candidate who campaigns like Mamdani's been campaigning, that person could be president. And if there are schmucks like Andrew Cuomo out there who the party is going to continue to coalesce around because, on paper, they might be, highest name recognition and have these, moderate credentials or whatever else, but they suck, then, we're going to keep losing.
I don't think a non-DSA candidate can win in a purple state. So what the takeaway should be is the vibes. You have to look like you're fighting for something, not run bad candidates like Cuomo, but just have good vibes and basically good video production.
I mean, we can't be surprised that that's those guys' analysis. They are literally the Obama guys, and Obama perfected that. Very cynically, in my view, but he did perfect that. The idea that you can run a quote good campaign. Let's keep that in mind. Running a good campaign can somehow be separate from what you're running on, and I think they genuinely believe that. I'm not giving them credit for that, but I think that's an honest belief. It's incredibly cynical. It's incredibly insulting to voters.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. The insinuation is voters are too stupid to be voting on a set of policy principles, that voters are only voting on the coolness, the brand, the vibes, the media savvy of a candidate.
Voters the color grading. I heard someone say it was the color grading of the videos in particular that was so optimistic that people were compelled to vote for him.
Exactly. That voters are too dumb to clue into what they are actually voting for. It is incredibly cynical. It's incredibly insulting. I will certainly concede that the better a messenger you have for a specific agenda, the better chance you have to win.
Course,
so you can't fully say like, a candidate's basic political skills don't matter at all. I'm not arguing that. But I think their belief and the Democratic blob's belief that you can run and you should run, and the ideal kind of campaign to run is one of where the candidate has charisma, skills, is telegenic, is media savvy, and it doesn't really matter what they're running on, or more importantly, whether they're really serious about delivering. I have just described Barack Obama. And those guys in Pod Save America, they helped create that. They created that. Barack Obama was a candidate who campaigned on very clear populist themes, framed it as hope and change, and turned it into more of the same. He got into the job and essentially went to bat for his donors, in specific, the big banks that were foreclosing on millions of Americans. He went to bat to create and fortify the power of the health insurance industry. And that, in my mind, created a lot of misery and created the backlash conditions for Donald Trump. We don't have to rehash that history, but that was their theory, that they could win elections with a very telegenic candidate campaigning on populism who would get into office and not really be serious about alienating the oligarchy, because the oligarchy was already in the tent when he was running. There was already a wink and nod baked into the Obama formula when he was right. He raised the most amount of money from Wall Street in the history of the country in that first campaign. So it was baked in. What's so different about the Mamdani race is that Mamdani has some of those same things that Obama has. He's telegenic, charismatic, media savvy, campaigning on populism, but the oligarchy is not in the tent. Right? And he was able to, and typically, if the oligarchy is not in the tent, you haven't been able to win. And I go back to the elite panic here. The elite panic is he didn't have the oligarchy in the tent. He's telegenic, charismatic, campaigning on populism. There is no wink and nod. And he was able to win. This is terrifying to the people in power in both the Democratic Party and the oligarchy in general. It's terrifying to them because it's the first time in anyone's memory that they haven't been able to determine the political outcome.
Yeah. And to your point about the sort of nexus of Obama era politics, the abundance bros that are trying to make sure that populism doesn't fill the void that exists after Kamala Harris's loss, et cetera. Matt Stoller surfaced this clip of Wall Street CEO Orszag,
Peter Orszag.
Peter Orszag.
Yeah. Who was an Obama guy, by the way. He literally was an Obama budget director.
That's Matt's point. He tweets pretty remarkable clip in which Obamacare architect turned Wall Street CEO slags Zohran for anti-Semitism and then says Democrats need to embrace Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's abundance book to fight back.
The New York mayoral race is only part of this broader question. I think the Democratic Party needs to decide what it stands for. It needs to put forward an economic vision of a pathway forward, and it needs to decide what its moral principles are, including on things like anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
What do you think it should stand for?
That's beyond just the mayor's race.
Yeah.
What is your advice?
I think it should stand for an agenda that mirrors what Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson have put forward in their abundance book, that recognizes that we need to expand supply in addition to subsidizing demand, that recognizes that capitalism has its flaws, but produces far better outcomes than any other system that mankind has designed, and that sticks to the moral principle that hate speech of any type, including anti-Semitism, is unacceptable, and that you have a merit-based and opportunity-based system that is as inclusive as possible.
So what do you make of this dance that slides from capitalism is good, actually, to also the people who are saying that capitalism is bad are anti-Semitic, and also buy Ezra Klein's book?
Right. I mean, it's like all the old plays from the playbook all wrapped in one. I mean, to my mind, the chaos of it, the incoherence of it, suggests that's why I'm using the word panic. I mean, it's a panic, right? It's like, let me throw out as many different things as I can, and let's see what sticks. Oh, he doesn't believe in capitalism. He's anti-Semitic. He's against this book called Abundance. Let's weaponize all of this against this guy. It's not coherent, right? I would say the political skill of Zohran Mamdani is as much, yes, he's telegenic, charismatic, he's smiling a lot, right? I mean, all that's good. But to me, the political genius of the campaign they ran was not just the agenda. I mean, it's an agenda that is important and populist and answers the question, which side are you on? The working class, the middle class, that clearly answers that. But the political genius is also the ability to summarize it, right? A city we can afford. Yeah. Talking about the affordability crisis. Everybody understands what that is. And the people who don't care about the affordability crisis are the people who benefit from the affordability crisis, which are the oligarchs that spent against him, which are, by the way, the affluent Democratic elites who don't really care about that affordability crisis. I mean, Peter Orszag, as an example, right? I'm not picking on him, but here's a guy who's beaming out live from the offices of a Wall Street giant, Lazard. Right? This is not a guy who cares about the affordability crisis in his life. The affordability crisis is not a crisis in his life, right? So he has the luxury. Larry Summers, all the other folks who've been trying to do this kind of thing against Zohran Mamdani, the affordability crisis is not a crisis in their lives. Arguably, the affordability crisis benefits them and their employers and their sort of economic class cohort. So they are trying to throw out as many different attacks to see which ones.
That's what it is. It's a smorgasbord of attacks.
Correct.
It's a desperation in the diversity of the attacks, because I think there has to be some acknowledgement, some realization, and I think you're seeing this in the pivot in the days after the election, that going all in on making this a referendum on Israel-Gaza did not work in Andrew Cuomo's favor. And my spicy take is that, in fact, over-indexing on that one hit on Zohran frankly prevented them from having the time and space to hit him on his defund the police tweets or other things that might have frankly been more galvanizing to folks who might not like him, especially in a city like New York. And I specifically was thinking of the Colbert interview where, famously Colbert asked like 3 separate questions, like follow-up questions about, Israel and globalized intifada, and does Israel have the right to exist and all of this stuff, in a relatively limited, 20-minute segment where you can imagine a world where he pivots to other topics and starts asking him, are you going to defund? And then asks a bunch of follow-ups about defund that don't resonate as well or aren't so morally cut and dry as Gaza has become for so many people.
Mr. Mamdani, same question. Does the state of Israel have the right to exist?
Yes, like all nations, I believe it has a right to exist and a responsibility also to uphold international law.
Okay, well, let's talk about the elephant in the room, is that there are many people in New York, even people who would support your candidacy otherwise, who don't want to support you because of the Jewish community's fear of the true and rising anti-Semitism, not only around the world, but in this country and shamefully in New York, which is the largest Jewish population of any city other than Tel Aviv in the whole world. And they are worried, they're very upset by some of the things that you've said in the past, and they are afraid that your mayorship would actually lead to increased anti-Semitism, that they believe that that would be more dangerous for them. What do you say to those New Yorkers who are afraid that you wouldn't be their mayor, that you wouldn't protect them?
Jewish New Yorkers and Muslim New Yorkers are not going to be divided from each other. We build a city where you have affordable housing and good schools and safe neighborhoods for everyone.
Well, Mr. Mamdani, I'm just curious, How do you think, you'd be the first Muslim mayor of New York, how do you think you could build a bridge of understanding between the significant Muslim population here in the city and the significant Jewish population here in the city? How do you think you could lower tension? How do you revitalize the city? How do you keep it clean and safe?
You know, I think as someone who cares deeply about public goods and the public sector, we have to care just as much about public excellence. We have to deliver the best quality of life in this city. And as Brad is saying, so much of that concern that many New Yorkers have is tied to a systematic underfunding of city agencies. We're talking about a mayor that we're both seeking to replace, who at one point was proposing removing trash cans from some New York City street corners. And that's part of what makes people feel as if they're living in a city that is dirtier, that is less well run than the one that they know.
Do we have money for that?
We do. We do.
Do we have money for that?
Well, look, my number one pledge in this campaign. All right. I'm glad you asked.
That being said, I do want to talk a little bit about the how we won of it all, because I also am concerned. I'm concerned that this was a very sort of context-specific reality, and that but for Cuomo being as bad, as hated, as reviled as he was for a slew of reasons, right? Not just Me Too, because there's people who don't care about Me Too, but the nursing home scandal. But then there's people who don't care so much about COVID, but corruption scandals and on down the line. Members of the Democratic establishment who were mad at him over the IDC and things like that. Because Cuomo was so reviled in combination with ranked choice voting. Those are the two but-for factors that I think were dispositive here. And so while I want to fully credit Zohran's emotional intelligence, political intelligence, rhetorical ability, videos, graphic design, all of those things, his stamina walking from one tip of the island to the other, I don't think it would have happened without both of those things, and here's why. Zohran had a spike of interest that the social media stuff was able to cultivate. But as someone who's been on the left for a while, and I wonder if you feel this as well, I have observed that there's kind of an allergy to losing, and that if people feel at all like this is like a candidate that's not going anywhere, they won't even try. Like they won't get excited at all. But the fact of ranked choice voting gives you permission to go ahead and be excited about someone without getting the pushback of they're not going to win anyway, you're wasting your vote. There's no wasting your vote with ranked choice. That combined with Cuomo being so horrible means people aren't going to even consider Cuomo. The don't rank Cuomo message goes very well. But it goes well, again, in part because don't rank Cuomo doesn't mean default to another bad person, Eric Adams or a Republican in the general, because it's New York, it's never going to be a Republican in general. But it means that I can safely express my growing enthusiasm that's being generated by Zohran's political skills as a number one Zohran ranked vote. And I watched these two things sort of work together in contrast to the kinds of resistance you get to other political figures who are also talented and who have great platforms and maybe are running outside the Democratic Party, but who even lefties in the lefty media environment have been largely indifferent to since Bernie's most recent electoral failure.
What do you make of it? I think there's two additional factors. Because I agree about ranked choice voting, not only making it safe to vote in the primary for who you believe in your heart, but also it created a really great coalition politics dynamic where different candidates could cross-endorse each other. I mean, that was a really wonderful thing to see in terms of solidarity.
Yes. Shout out to Brad Lander, who has been a real champion, a real mensch through all of this, like
totally.
top tier solidarity.
Totally. So I agree ranked choice was a factor. I agree that Andrew Cuomo being singularly a sort of comic book supervillain, that worked against him. I also think we can't downplay the importance of the fact that New York has been the place where the Working Families Party has been trying to build a so-called Tea Party of the Democrats, a Tea Party of the left, for 10 to 15 years. Something I've been reporting on a lot over many years. So there's a lot of groundwork that had gone into to this that led up to this. And last but certainly not least, New York created a system of public financing for candidates where candidates like Zohran Mamdani, who don't have big money behind them, can raise a certain threshold amount of money and then get a lot more money, publicly financed money, that allows them to run at least a competitive campaign, have enough resources to at least compete at some level. He still got outspent 3 or 4 to 1, but he was able to at least compete at a serious level in terms of resources. We talk a lot about this in the Master Plan podcast, which is about the legalization of corruption, that one of the ways to combat the legalization of corruption and the buying and selling of elections is to publicly finance our elections. And for those who don't understand what that is, it basically means that if you raise a certain amount, a threshold amount of small dollar donations, that money is essentially matched by a pool of public money, so that you can run for office and finance your campaign without having to trade legislative favors with giant donors who are bankrolling a campaign, right? It's a way to run the kind of campaign that Zohran was able to run. So I agree with you. All of those 4 factors contributed. And then, of course, the message itself. Right? Those 4 factors allowed a place and a space for the message to really get through. I think that's certainly true. And I think other places, other locales, cities and states should take heed of that they should look at this and say, listen, whether you like or do not like Zohran Mamdani, New York, without those factors, is really not much of a democracy, right? It was hilarious. The Atlantic had that piece. New York is not a democracy, and they were mad at Zohran because it was like, I think the argument was something along the lines of too few voters vote in these primaries there, and Zohran's winning, so that means New York, essentially Zohran Mamdani is a threat to democracy. It was, classic billionaire owned media having a temper tantrum. Mm-hmm. But I think the counter is also true. That those factors I just laid out, especially public financing of elections, the grassroots organizing work, ranked choice voting, those are small d democratic reforms that allowed the anti-democracy force in that election, 3, 4, 5 to 1 outspending, that was a counter to that. So pro-democracy reforms, I think, essentially platform or give a chance to grassroots candidates, by the way, regardless of what their ideology is. That's what I mean by forgetting for a moment what Zohran Mamdani even stands for. He was able to run a campaign because there were some basic foundations of democracy inside of this election that in some ways do not exist in other places, and other places should take cues from that. But I want to go back to one other thing that you said, because if you zoom back out, Cuomo being so uniquely sort of detestable, I actually think, again, I go back to why is the elite panicking so much? It's not really about Zohran Mamdani's agenda. It's not about sort of this ideological fear of democratic socialism. To my mind, this was like you couldn't have built a more pure experiment in a lab, right? You had on one side the, again, comic book supervillain, unlikable, I saw some quote in the New York Times of I think it was one of his aides. It says, this guy doesn't even like people. He can't interact with people. Just a complete, the worst possible, most unlikable candidate with all of the money versus an incredibly likable candidate with a very popular message, with none of the big money. I mean, certainly, as I just said, some resources to compete, but none of the huge money. So let's see if in this sort of pure experiment, if we, the oligarchy, can still buy this election. Because if we can still buy this, running a completely sort of detestable comic book supervillain with no redeeming qualities, and we can still buy an election against a super likable guy with a super popular message, then basically democracy really doesn't exist. And I was saying that, honestly, before this election. I said to a bunch of friends, listen, if Andrew Cuomo wins this election, it's essentially over. The whole thing, the whole process, this whole idea of democracy and accountability is just a joke. It makes a joke out of it, right? I mean, this guy had so many scandals, he had to be bounced out of the governor's office, and somehow can just come back and to be able to just waltz back in and be rewarded.
Yes.
Would have been
endorsed by some of the same people who said he needed to step down.
It's incredibly nihilistic and disturbing. And I asked I asked Bill de Blasio, I asked Zohran Mamdani himself, what do you make of the fact that Andrew Cuomo can be who he is, having done what he did? I mean, this is a guy who presided over the deaths of thousands of New York City residents and gave immunity to the nursing home CEOs whose lobby groups were giving him money, immunity from the victims' families' lawsuits, right? That's just one of the many scandals. This guy can do this and still, forget about even winning, can still be a viable candidate, can still run for an office to be rewarded for that record. But the fact that he was even competitive is a really a depressing statement on the state of our politics. And I asked them, what do you make of this? And a lot of it was, look, he's got a famous last name. He had a lot of money to amplify his message. And we live in a time where if you have enough money to amplify your own message and you have a famous name, you can be competitive. And that's why I think the people behind him are so freaked out. They're like, we can't necessarily buy everything. We can't own and buy it all. And I say in this piece that I wrote with Rolling Stone, which was basically that, if you're used to getting everything, if you're used to always getting your way, then momentarily not getting your way is very shocking to you. I mean, it's very scary. I mean, I said, as I put it, like when you're so accustomed to privilege, the most minimally humane policies for others, like the one that Mamdani has been pushing, those can seem like, right, like when you're so accustomed to privilege and so accustomed to buying elections, the most minimally humane policies, the most minimal challenge to your electoral dominance probably feels like oppression, right?
Free buses, what's next? Human rights?
Right, exactly. So I that's why I think this is such an important moment, because it's really a mask-off moment for how dominant the oligarchy has been, how entitled they feel to determine all of the political outcomes, and how shocked they are that there might be some modicum of a check on their power.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.